Hello and welcome. This is Glumburger, and you are watching Homes for Drones. We discuss all facets of drone music, from ambient drone to drone rock and so on and so forth. And what better way to start off this new project than to discuss 10 ambient albums you should definitely be checking out. What's been selected here isn't being presented in any particular order, and I'm hoping it kind of demonstrates some diversity within the genre. Albums that hit hard emotionally to ones that simply pull you into a gentle slumber. If you're already into ambient music, you may well have heard some of these already, but hopefully there's one or two things in this list to help further your discovery of one of the most diverse genres in music. As a quick note, if there's any mispronunciations of any of the artists or names of their albums, etc., then I do apologise here. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Also, where possible, I will leave links to all the albums mentioned in this video, so if you feel like discovering some new music that you haven't already heard, go check them out and give them your support. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10. Kern-Host by James A. McDermott. From White Lab Records, Kern-Host is a harrowing and tragic work of beauty from Bristol-based musician James A. McDermott. The record finalises a trilogy of albums by McDermott, each encompassing a different time frame of his late sister Harriet's departure from her diagnosis on Ghost Folk to her regretful passing away on Tonal Glints, and the closure of it all on Kern-Host. With this in mind, it gives the album a very powerful presence of using the composition of music to understand what simply cannot be put into words, letting the ideas and melodies morph, shift and develop into something far beyond itself. At times, it's a very tough listen, with the tones and layers feeling very ethereal and ghostly, hardly sounding like instruments and instead just twisted versions of their original counterparts. Yet all contributing to this overall album experience that just tugs at your very heart. And as the album progresses, it feels like a multitude of emotions, from confusion and fear, before it all finally culminates into the 15-minute drone La Mort d'un Soul Innocent, where it feels like the world's longest breath of air been taken after an incredibly heavy ordeal. Number 9. On Falling by Marcus Fisher. If you're familiar with Taylor Dupree's record label 12K, then you might be familiar with the works of Marcus Fisher. Exploring Fisher's discography has resulted in some of the most rewarding ambient albums one could listen to. And although it's hard to choose just one, I personally always find myself coming back to On Falling. Utilising guitar, tape loops, synthesizer and field recordings, Fisher allows random acts of happenstance to help influence the aesthetic of his music, all of which culminates in a series of dreamy drones, scratchy acoustics and gentle tape loops that pull you into this dream world. The album then closes off with a live rendition of all the concepts and techniques heard in the previous 4 tracks, a half-hour ambient odyssey of precise improvisation. Whilst other records from Fisher may stand out more amongst his discography than On Falling, this record is one that people may actually miss, as it's not been released on album format, only digital and I think on tape on 12K. Hence why it's been included on today's list. Definitely one worth checking out. Number 8. We Will Always Be by Windy and Carl. So first off, I can't begin to express how much I love the album We Will Always Be by Windy and Carl. In ambient music, it sometimes feels like bands like Stars of the Lid garner the most attention out of any band from the Cranky record label, arguably overshadowing some of their label mates to an extent. And don't get me wrong, I love Stars of the Lid, but I feel like if you're here, you've probably already heard of them. whereas a band like Windy and Carl you may not have heard of. We Will Always Be, the duo's 5th album for Cranky, manages to completely transcend the beautiful myriad of emotions the band have conjured up in all of their albums, and completely transport it to the stratosphere in this hour-long opus. Unlike their previous albums, We Will Always Be features magnificent transitioning from track to track, helping to keep us completely enveloped in the beautiful ambient layers as it blissfully travels along. So if you're new to Windy and Carl, definitely check this one out. The start features a very airy, gentle acoustic number, but then it all opens up into this phenomenal world of cosmic drones. Definitely not one to be missed. Number 7. Piano Text by Aloof Proof. Originally released in 1994, Piano Text by Aloof Proof is perhaps one of Ambient Drones' better kept secrets. The album is perhaps a perfect textbook of what one can achieve with the genre, with the most gentle of motifs playing alongside the most grandoir of droning compositions. The first track feels incredibly heavy and mournful with its long runtime of just shy of a half hour, with it being the perfect length to completely swallow you whole and throw you into the depths of its musical layers. Everything that still feels incredibly delicate and deliberate, and before long you forget you've even been listening to the tracks for ages, and instead you found yourself floating along empty seas in the dead of night, with the faintest glimmers of life stretching out towards the distance. Although first released in 1994, the record label Infraction saw it wise to re-release the album in 2007, giving it a whole new audience of people who just love those drones. Number 6. Hochu-ekki-tou by Tomoyashi Date and Steigen Huels. Exploring the Home Normal record label will probably showcase a very diverse range of ambient styles from their many artists. One of my favourite albums I've come across from the label is the collaborative album by Tomoyashi Date and Steigen Huels, Hochu-ekki-tou. You might know Tomoyashi from his work with Corey Fuller as part of the ambient duo Ilua, who have a number of releases on 12K, and Steigen Huels being a regular on Home Normal by now. Across 3 tracks we're met with some of the most patient musical motifs that carry with themselves an incredible weight of emotion and power. It's as though there's no momentum pushing this music along, with instead every tone and every note feeling incredibly organic and wonderfully minimalist. There's a heavy melancholy to the second track, also the longest of the album, which paves the way brilliantly for the closer, which carries that melancholy into something slightly more optimistic or maybe even more hopeful. Either way, it's simply beautiful, and definitely an album to check out if you have the patience for more long-form pieces. Number 5, Seas Between by Corey Fuller. So going back to the duo Ilua, it is definitely worth mentioning the other member Corey Fuller's solo work. In particular, his release for Jan Novak's label Dragon Eyes Recordings. Seas Between is simply put a beautifully and absurdly delicately crafted album that utilises a phenomenal array of instruments that add just the right tone or texture here and there to help it elevate the music far beyond what is simply being heard. Like the seas themselves, it feels like there's something swirling under the surface, ready to rise out from the ocean and show the full forces of nature in all of its glory. And it all feels deliberate yet incredibly unpredictable. And soon enough you simply just have to let yourself go and allow yourself to float along the vast empty oceans. There's also a number of guest musicians too to add to the already abundant array of instruments featured on the album, including the previously mentioned Tomoyashi Date, all of whom contribute wonderfully to Corey's melancholy vision. Number 4, Confluence by Manual. This album by electronic musician Jonas Munch-Jansen is one of many released under the moniker of Manual. Across the musician's discography is a wonderful array of varying ambient styles, from IDM, electronica and drone. And whereas other albums by Manual feature more of a Boards of Canada Aphex Twin vibe at times, sort of utilising beats to help move the music along, Confluence instead lets textures tell the story, featuring virtually no beats at all in any of the tracks. It's instead an ambient experience that genuinely feels more akin to Stars of the Lid, where drones seem to just glide in from out of nowhere, carrying gentle keys that paint the overall picture of what is happening. That picture being whatever it is that comes to your mind when you let yourself get lost within the layers. It's a very gentle, pure ambient album, one of which if you haven't heard before, you should definitely just allow yourself to get lost within. Number 3. La Orange by Greg Kowalski. I remember back in 2017 when I used to write for Echoes and Dust, picking up this album to review as I was already familiar with Kowalski from having released 2 albums on Cranky, those being Through the Cardinal Window and Tape Chance. La Orange at the time was Kowalski's first record in 8 years, and since 2017 it's held a special place in my heart as being one of the most warmest, most inviting ambient albums I've ever had the pleasure to listen to. Listening to the album feels like driving along the coast, with the sun so glaringly bright and warm that you feel it rise inside your entire body. If you ask yourself, what does the sun sound like? Well, it very well might sound like this if you're standing on the right beach at the right time of day, staring at the horizon, with the wind blowing gently past you. Arguably some tracks feel a little bit darker at times, a little more ominous, but it helps to create a very diverse album experience that all ties together its main concept of expressing the sun in all of its facets. And I think if you listen to the third track, Tuned in Monochrome, you'll best get the sense of that bubbly, delicious warmth that gives you those good sunny vibes. Number 2. Rêves Sonores in Montreal by Stephen Christophe and Nick Schofield. Whilst not necessarily a strictly ambient artist, the work of Stephen Christophe has seen him enter the foray of ambience from time to time, most notably on this release with Nick Schofield. Christophe, simply put, is an absolute maestro when it comes to the piano. Hailing from the Canadian jazz scene, he's seemingly able to pluck absolute emotion and timbre from even the faintest of notes. So this, backed with the gentle ambient swells and warbles, create this wonderfully inviting album that's full to the brim of emotion and catharsis. It's arguably Christophe's very notable style that sets this aside from other ambient records. He seems to be able to meld his very distinct piano playing together with whomever it is he's playing with. And on this record in particular, it works perfectly to create this almost call and response style of piano and drones at times. There's just a beauty to so many of the tracks, some of which seem wistful, others leaning towards melancholy, all of which though help create this wonderfully rich and vibrant tapestry. If you like what you're hearing from him, definitely check out his other records as well if you ever get the chance. Number 1. A Light at the Edge of the World by Andrew Chalk. So finally, it would be remiss of me not to mention the work of Andrew Chalk, if there's even the slightest chance that you haven't heard of him yet. Andrew Chalk has a very extensive body of work exploring different sides of ambient from time to time, from dark, unsettling drones to gentle works of pure beauty. A Light at the Edge of the World is easily my most favourite album of all of his works, and easily one of my favourite albums of all time, basically. The 40-minute title track simply unravels effortlessly, utilising incredibly gentle drones to help support delicate piano notes that create this overall image. It's so relaxing that Even after the absolute hardest day at work, it easily manages to bring all the stress and emotion down to a comfortable and calm level where everything just feels okay. I always feel incredibly indebted to albums that manage to just attach themselves to my heart upon the first listen without any effort whatsoever, and Chalk easily achieves that with A Light at the Edge of the World. So if you haven't already, and you love gentle, meandering ambient pieces that float around in the air, then definitely go discover this one. You will not regret it. And that completes our 10 ambient albums that you may not have heard of. Hopefully there was something new for you here in this list, something you may not have heard of before and can go discover for the first time. Whilst there's an array of different emotions and feelings across these 10 albums, each one still demonstrates the sheer amount of creativity that goes into expressing oneself, using the genre to let everything speak for itself and carry you on whatever journey your mind manages to conjure up for it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and will stick around for the next one, whatever that will be, whenever that will be. But for now, take care, all the best, and bye bye for now. Goodbye.